Ladies and gentlemen, Excellencies, my name is Marko Mihkelson. I'm the Chair of Foreign Affairs Committee of Estonian Parliament, Riigikogu, and I'm very happy to call second session of our today's conference open. This session is very dynamic, as you see from agenda, and we will start with two introductory speeches. And first, I would like to ask to come here to give a first speech Mr. Jean-Yves Le Drian, who is the Minister for Europe and Foreign Affairs of France. Please.
Monsieur le Président, Madame et Messieurs les ministres, Mesdames et Messieurs, je suis très heureux d'être à vos côtés ce matin, ici à Tallinn, pour cette conférence qui me paraît d'autant plus pertinente que le retour de la guerre sur notre continent nous rappelle l'importance de la notion de souveraineté égale de tous les États. C'est la force de l'Union européenne de donner à chacun de ses membres le poids de l'ensemble du bloc. C'est la force de l'Alliance atlantique de mettre la puissance de tous au service de chacun. C'est la force des Nations unies de donner corps au principe d'égalité souveraine des États. Ce principe cardinal est aujourd'hui bafoué par la Russie, dont la guerre contre l'Ukraine constitue tout à la fois une déstabilisation sans précédent de l'ordre international construit au lendemain de la guerre, de la Seconde Guerre mondiale, et une agression absolument illégale et absolument injustifiable contre le peuple ukrainien. Nous le savons tous, la guerre de Vladimir Poutine a déjà jeté plus de 10 millions d'Ukrainiennes et d'Ukrainiens sur les routes de l'exode, à l'intérieur du pays ou à l'extérieur de leurs frontières. Et ceux qui restent prisonniers des bombardements indiscriminés de la Russie et de ces tactiques de siège indignes vivent au quotidien dans l'angoisse et le danger. Et pourtant, l'Ukraine résiste courageusement. Elle tient bon envers et contre tout. Et depuis le début, dans une coordination transatlantique exemplaire, nous sommes aux côtés du président Zelensky et des autorités ukrainiennes. Ensemble, nous leur fournissons du matériel dont ils ont besoin pour se défendre et faire face aussi aux urgences humanitaires. Ensemble, en un temps record, nous avons adopté des sanctions économiques massives pour rendre le coût de la guerre insupportable à la Russie. Nous renforcerons ces sanctions aussi longtemps que durera cette guerre et qu'une solution politique garantissant la souveraineté et la sécurité de l'Ukraine n'aura pas été trouvée et mise en œuvre. Et en Européens, nous avons fait le choix d'interdire au Kremlin de déverser sa propagande de guerre sur notre continent. Le temps où Vladimir Poutine pouvait retourner les armes de la démocratie contre la démocratie et tenter de s'en servir pour diviser les Européens entre eux, ce temps-là est désormais révolu. Et autre surprise stratégique pour lui, de nombreux États membres ont brisé les tabous et se sont engagés dans une relance rapide de leurs efforts de défense. Qu'en est-il aujourd'hui et à quoi devons-nous nous préparer pour demain? Certes, la Russie amorce un changement de narratif que vous observez vous-même, d'ailleurs qui varie tous les jours. Mais nous ne pouvons juger que des actes. Et pour l'instant, ils ne sont pas là. Le précédent syrien, que j'ai vécu dans d'autres fonctions, doit nous inciter effectivement à la plus grande prudence, comme d'ailleurs les effets d'annonce mensongers qui ont précédé le lancement de l'invasion de l'Ukraine. Ne l'oublions pas. Il y a donc pour nous un impératif très clair, ne rien céder et même redoubler d'efforts jusqu'à obtenir un cessez-le-feu complet sur l'ensemble du territoire ukrainien et de vraies négociations. Nous devons donc d'abord accroître la pression économique sur le régime russe. Et la priorité aujourd'hui, c'est de briser nos dépendances aux hydrocarbures russes. C'est un véritable défi. C'est un défi européen. Car si nous n'avons pas tous le même degré de dépendance vis-à-vis de la Russie, nous avons tous le même intérêt à en sortir ensemble. Il est donc capital que nous présentions au Conseil européen de mai, à la suite de ce qu'on appelle l'agenda de Versailles, un plan cohérent pour y parvenir au plus vite. Nous devons ensuite renforcer encore davantage notre soutien matériel, humain, financier, militaire, humanitaire à l'Ukraine. Je voudrais être très clair avec vous, la Russie ne doit pas espérer gagner. Et ce n'est pas seulement inenvisageable d'un point de vue moral, l'enjeu pour nous est également stratégique. Justement, nous devons dans le même temps prendre toute la mesure des menaces qui pèsent aussi sur nous et en tirer les conséquences. Au fil des dernières années, nous nous sommes collectivement engagés sur une voie de souveraineté et de puissance. Et les événements actuels montrent combien nous avons eu raison. Quand je dis collectivement engagés, je dis collectivement les Européens. Mais nous devons aller plus vite, nous devons aller beaucoup plus vite. La responsabilité que nous portons tous à l'égard de nos nations et à l'égard de notre Europe, c'est de tout faire pour réduire nos vulnérabilités militaires, sécuritaires, numériques ou encore même agricoles et alimentaires. Alors, de Tallinn à Paris, beaucoup a déjà été fait en ce sens, mais nous devons continuer avec beaucoup de détermination. J'y insiste, c'est une responsabilité collective. Et cette responsabilité collective nous renvoie à nos engagements de solidarité fondamentaux, ce que sont l'article 42.7 du traité de l'Union européenne et l'article 5 du traité de l'Atlantique Nord. Hier, certains se figuraient encore que l'idée de défense européenne était hors de propos. Aujourd'hui, qui peut douter de la nécessité de rééquiper nos armées nationales et leur donner les moyens de mieux travailler ensemble dans tous les formats utiles? Car ce que nous voulons, ce n'est pas une armée européenne de papier. Ce que nous voulons, c'est des armées nationales fortes, capables de travailler ensemble à l'Union européenne et à l'OTAN. Et la boussole stratégique que nous avons adoptée la semaine dernière doit nous permettre d'accélérer la construction de cette culture stratégique commune entre Européens sur la base de notre analyse partagée des menaces. Et cette action européenne est évidemment est conduite en complémentarité avec l'OTAN, où nous travaillons parallèlement à l'adoption du nouveau concept stratégique au sommet de Madrid en juin prochain. Comme vous le savez, la France prend toute sa part de l'effort transatlantique qui s'est encore accru, notamment ici en Estonie, au titre de la présence avancée renforcée, comme elle l'a fait aussi antérieurement en Lettonie, et sur le flanc oriental en tant que nation cadre du nouveau bataillon multinational qui est déployé déjà en Roumanie. Nous devons enfin continuer à isoler la Russie. Cela ne signifie pas couper tous les contacts avec Moscou. Ce n'est d'ailleurs pas ce que nous demandent les Ukrainiens, qui doivent pouvoir compter sur nos canaux pour préparer le retour d'une véritable négociation le moment venu. Cela signifie, très concrètement, que nous devons montrer à nos partenaires de tous les continents que la guerre de la Russie contre l'Ukraine, parce qu'elle est la négation des principes et des engagements qui nous protègent tous, c'est bien l'affaire de tous. Car cautionner la remise en cause par la force des frontières internationalement reconnues, se résoudre à ce qu'une puissance conteste jusqu'au droit d'une nation à exister, accepter le massacre et la prise en otage de centaines de milliers de civils, ça n'est en vérité l'intérêt d'aucun État. Et c'est le message que nous devons porter partout en l'expliquant. Il est plus fort que tous les mensonges et toutes les manipulations de la propagande russe. Et cette propagande, nous devons aussi la contrer sur un autre point essentiel qui commence à apparaître très fortement. Si plusieurs pays du Sud se trouvent aujourd'hui au bord d'une crise alimentaire dramatique, c'est parce que Vladimir Poutine préfère sa guerre à la sécurité alimentaire mondiale. Dont acte. Et pour notre part, il nous faut être au rendez-vous de la solidarité et de l'efficacité sur ce point-là, qui va devenir majeur. Et nous avons proposé, le président Macron, l'initiative Farm, en lien avec le programme alimentaire mondial et nos partenaires africains, pour éviter cette dérive-là, qui doit être aussi une de nos priorités. Voilà, mesdames et messieurs, les Nations Unies, l'ONU est devenue un de nos biens communs les plus précieux. Et comme l'a fait l'Estonie au Conseil de sécurité ces 2 dernières années, nous devons donc, en Européens, y combattre sans relâche les faux-semblants de la Russie et aussi, chère Madame Tikhanovskaya, de ses complices bélarusses, en refusant et leurs mensonges et leurs exactions. Voilà ce que je voulais vous dire au seuil de votre échange, et je vous remercie de m'avoir invité à venir ici, à Tallinn, dans ces circonstances. Merci.
Thank you, Minister, honoring us here in Tallinn, but also for your views, sharing with us. We have time for one question, and we agreed that this question I will ask Minister. Please. So, it must be. Mr. Le Drian is probably one of the most experienced politicians in Europe. During last decade, he started to work as a Minister of Defense of France in 2012, worked 5 years as a Minister of Defense, and then since 2017 as a Minister of Foreign Affairs. So you have very rich experience, of course, what has happened during this last 10 years. And actually my question goes this way. Could you please elaborate a little bit from your own experience why we, as members of United Nations, but also as members of democratic world, weren't able to stop this catastrophe coming, what we see today in Ukraine? And from your experience, from those perhaps also mistakes we commonly did during this time, what is your advice to all of us, how to build the strategy that we could really lead the world to the point that particularly Russia won't threaten all of us with nuclear war or wars like they carry out right now against Ukraine?
C'est une réponse qui mériterait un autre exposé complet. Vous avez bien voulu rappeler la durée de mes responsabilités. Je crois que j'ai observé une triple dérive des autorités russes et singulièrement du président Poutine au cours de ces 10 dernières années, avec une très forte accélération à la fin. Une des dérives, triple dérive autoritaire. D'abord une dérive autoritaire intérieure, que l'on a vu croître au fur et à mesure des années, une forme d'asphyxie de la démocratie, parce que les uns et les autres, nous pensions qu'à un moment donné, que la Russie pouvait s'ouvrir à la démocratie. Et nous avons vu progressivement se rétrécir le champ de la liberté interne à la Russie. Alors il y a des exemples spectaculaires, Navalny en fait partie. Mais cette évolution-là a été lente, mais avec une forte détermination successive, peut-être une forme d'étouffement gradué, on pourrait appeler ça comme ça. Dont on a peut-être eu un peu de mal à voir la graduation parce que, comme c'est lent, on n'est pas automatiquement attentif à des actes forts, sauf l'affaire Navalny, qui est un exemple révélateur. Il y a eu parallèlement à cela une dérive externe d'influence, d'instrumentalisation des certains pays occidentaux, démocratie. Ça a été le cas aux États-Unis, aux élections présidentielles. Ça a été le cas en France. Nous sommes dans une phase d'élection présidentielle en ce moment. Mais la dernière élection présidentielle, on connaît les actions d'instrumentalisation qui ont été menées à l'encontre d'un candidat, qui est en fait devenu le président de la République. Et qui a eu, parce que parfois on l'oublie, je vous le rappelle parce que c'est un fait avéré, lorsque le président Macron a invité le président Poutine à Versailles, 2017, peu de temps après son élection, certains ont pu être surpris, il lui a dit les choses publiquement. Je vous le rappelle, ce qu'il lui a dit, je t'ai vu. C'est toi qui as fait cela. Les yeux dans les yeux, il lui a dit publiquement. Tu as essayé d'instrumentaliser la démocratie française, tu n'as pas réussi. Mais je pense que, je rappelle ça pour l'anecdote, parce qu'il y a eu parfois des interprétations qui n'ont pas été justes à l'égard de cette visite, où les choses ont été dites partout clairement. Dérive d'instrumentalisation avec aussi les réseaux sociaux, les médias, tout ce que vous connaissez, qu'on n'a peut-être pas vu venir suffisamment clairement, puisque c'était là aussi successif. Et puis dérive d'intervention extérieure, que ce soit la Géorgie, que ce soit même Tchétchénie avant, que ce soit ensuite la Crimée. Nous n'avons peut-être pas non plus su anticiper ou réagir. J'avoue que c'était compliqué lorsqu'il y a eu cette pénétration russe de soutien à Bachar el-Assad, mais j'avoue que c'était compliqué. Et pour répondre à votre question, je crois qu'il y a eu progressivement une imbrication de ces trois dérives et qui font qu'aujourd'hui nous sommes en face d'un homme qui a engagé une forme d'instrumentalisation de l'histoire, un revisionnisme à main armée qui l'amène dans une forme de messianisme sinistre. Nous pensons toujours que la Russie est là, qu'elle géographiquement elle est présente, Elle n'a pas l'intention de déménager. C'est pas en Estonie que je vais dire le contraire. Et nous pensons toujours qu'il faudrait trouver le moyen au moins de l'arrimer. C'est la logique dans laquelle nous avons été un peu tous à un moment donné dans l'histoire, au cours de ces dernières années, par des échanges que nous avons voulu poursuivre, par des échanges aussi économiques que nous pensions pouvoir aboutir à des transformations internes, par des échanges culturels que nous avons les uns et les autres menés, mais nous y pensions, nous le croyions, mais ça n'a pas pesé par rapport à la conjonction de ces trois dérives qui aboutit à ce résultat d'aujourd'hui, qui est l'exacerbation de cette logique qui se traduit par la guerre. Voilà où nous en sommes, si bien que je suis convaincu pour ma part, que le but de guerre n'était pas d'abord la reconnaissance de Luhansk et de Donetsk, mais bien l'évitement d'une nation démocratique et sa transformation en État croupion. Voilà mes quelques réflexions brutes de décoffrage, si je peux dire, après votre question. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Minister.
Merci.
Thank you. So thank you very much indeed for the speech and answer to question. Now we go to Ukraine. Do we have our next guest? Yes, we have. Very good afternoon, Mr. Žavkva. Good to see you. But I know that your time is very limited. But I would like to give a floor to you to talk about your views of current situation in Ukraine and how do you see the situation is evolving. Please, Igor.
Thank you. Thank you. Your Excellencies, distinguished participants of the conference, distinguished audience, it's really a pleasure for me to be invited to such a high-level event and to have an opportunity to speak on the topic which is of vital importance today for today's not only Europe but for today's entire world. The war against Ukraine, which Russia treacherously waging for already 37 days. What is more important, not only about the state of Ukraine, but among Ukrainians themselves. Ukrainians as a people in the center of Europe, Ukrainians as a free European nation. We recently see some statements of the Russian officials about withdrawing of some troops from some directions. I have to tell you, and we have to all be aware, the war will not end, even with the fact that Russian military will simply leave the territory of Ukraine. And for the time being, unfortunately, they are not leaving. They are just regrouping themselves. And I believe you all know this, and you all understand this. Russia has declared a war against Ukraine, against Europe, against our values, against our civilization as a whole, against the entire existing world order. And I was very pleased to listen to Minister Le Drian, who was France's Minister of Defense, like it was said today, for already 5 years in 2012 and 2017, and particularly in 2014, when Russian troops first occupied the Crimea and then cowardly occupied the Donbas. And that's when it started against my country. And I absolutely support the idea of Mr. Minister that the West have overslept that time. The reaction was weak, if absolutely nothing. In 2014, when Crimea was attacked, the West has awakened slightly after the tragedy with MH17 aircraft on July 17, 2014. And only by the end of 2014, when the invasion against Donbas has openly started, though Russia cowardly were saying that This is not them. This is so-called armies of the so-called rebels, but we all know what was there. So the West misreacted or reacted weakly throughout the whole 2014. And this led to the events which we're now having, to the open war, when Russia does not cowardly saying, this is not us, these are they, these are armed forces of Russia, which are doing atrocities and humanitarian genocide against ordinary Ukrainians now. So we should all understand the reality. The target of Russia today, not even Donetsk or Lugansk, not the south of Ukraine, not even only the capital of Ukraine, not only even the territory of Ukraine. The Kremlin's goal today is to spread the aggression further on and to occupy wherever they are allowed. Until Russia receives a proper and strong rebuff from all of us, they will go further. So we should all forget about failed attempts, to play constructive dialogue with Russia. Sorry, Mr. Minister, but the dialogue with Russia without results is useless, is fruitless. I think we should all, drop the attempts to appease the aggressor. And when we in Ukraine hear that it's not high time to implement further sanctions in order not to bring the war any further, or when we hear the words that embargo on oil would be only introduced when Russia uses biological and chemical weaponry against Ukraine, like one high-level official and one leading European Union country said. That brings a very good signal to Russia. They are weak. They don't know how to react. Ukraine is fighting, but in the end, they will not survive. No one helps them, so we can go further. So Putin and Russia together might be stopped together by all of us, only together. That is what we need to talk about today. And that's what Ukraine expects from our partners. As you gathered here today in peaceful and beautiful Estonia, I'm here in beautiful, which used to be peaceful Ukraine, fighting 37th day of war. We have been able to withstand this aggression, these ground operations. We're doing quite well on the ground. Despite the brutalities, despite the atrocities against the peaceful citizens, despite the constant airstrikes and missile strikes, practically against every city of Ukraine, because there is no safe place now in Ukraine, you have to understand it. Not in Kyiv, not in East, not in South, not in Western Ukraine, which is now being constantly attacked, not only military infrastructure, by Russian cruise missile, but Russian supersonic missiles. Russia attacked not only our land and territory and cities, they are attacking our values, basic human values, because what they're now doing in Mariupol, or what they were doing in Volnovakh, or what they're doing in Izium, is absolutely genocide, is absolutely atrocity. And now when we decide the fate of our state, the fate of our people, we Ukrainians decide we want to be free. And we will continue to fight to the end. And we will definitely win over the aggressor. First of all, let me start with the appreciation to the MFA of Estonia and the Estonian Foreign Policy Institute for arranging this very important event and for drawing the attention of the whole international community to the war in Ukraine. Really, let me start, since you are in Estonia, so let me start thanking the Estonian friends, Estonian government for huge practical support already provided by your country, for providing javelins, anti-tank systems, for other items and equipment, as well as for the relevant ammunition. This is what helpful. Just, you can believe. One javelin for us now means much more than hundreds of thousands of words of support. And once again, thank you for Estonia. Thank you to Estonia. Thank you to other representatives of other states who are gathering here today for support of us. Fortunately, we do have you. We do have many good neighbors, many true friends, many reliable partners, many reliable institutions, among them EU, UN, hopefully still NATO. And we have many international partners and friends who support us in our strong fight. Political support combined with tangible practical assistance is what Ukraine needed for the time being. We do believe that no Kremlin-owned media, no Russian propaganda, no false statement of aggressor will harm the united position of all the international community vis-a-vis my country. Several pillars where we need the international support and we need the strength of all of you to fight the Russian aggressor. First of all, the world community must continue and strengthen the sanction policy against Russia. We are thankful for the current level of sanctions which you are rendering, but this is too late, too slow, and far from being enough. I will just remind you the words of my president, who, before the war started, has openly told to your leaders, please introduce the preventive sanctions against Russia, which might have, happened that the war would not have started if those sanctions might have been introduced. Unfortunately, no prevention sanctions against aggressor were introduced in the end of the previous year, in the beginning of this year, and we have what we have. Some of your leaders still were thinking about, dialogue, talking to Russia, not making Russia angry. Look what happened. So now sanctions which are introduced again are good, but not enough. More for this, Russia is trying to circumvent those existing sanctions, trying to find the loopholes, trying to pretend that sanctions don't hurt and sanctions don't matter. They do matter for them. And that's why we do ask our Western partners and friends to increase non-military price of aggression. This is very important. Every Russian bank, not just a few, not just the 7 which were introduced in the first package of the EU, but every Russian bank, including, sorry for that, Sberbank, Gazprombank, which is still used for payments for Russian gas and oil, should be disconnected from SWIFT banking system. Russian oligarchs and politically exposed persons all over Russia should be subject to personal sanctions. Russian citizens should not be granted visas entering the EU and other countries. They should feel the pain which Ukrainians now feel. We also call and will be calling for all of you to full embargo on Russian oil, gas, and all Russian exports to the European countries, to the United States, to other countries. When some of your leaders tell us that it's economically painful, yes, it might be economically painful for citizens of European countries, but it's deadly painful for citizens of Ukraine, who die in every minute, every hour, because every dollar or euro which Russia earns trading with your countries, they immediately spend to the military industry. And the military industry immediately produce cruise missiles, calibers, supersonic missiles, which our anti-air missile system cannot detect because they are modern new, they're brand new, and which killing citizens of Ukraine, civilians of Ukraine, children of Ukraine, women of Ukraine. The ports, all the ports in the European countries and worldwide should be closed for Russian ships. And there are still numerous European companies that keep doing business in Russia, again, financing the aggressor against Ukraine, bringing money to the aggressor. Unfortunately, Mr. Minister didn't mention that, but many French companies are still working, despite our appeals to the French business as well as to other business, they still earn money. So probably they should decide on which side they are. If they are on the side of aggressor, okay, this is their choice. We have nothing to do with this. That hopefully this will not prevail. Yes, these measures which we ask, we do understand, might bring some losses to the world economy. But the alternative of not doing anything, or just saying, okay, this current level of sanctions is enough, we will search for loopholes, for other things, but this is where we are. It's not good. You know, when we hear some words that embargo on oil would be introduced only when Russia uses chemical and biological weapon against Ukraine. These are the words of one high-level official in one European country. You might remember these words said several days ago. How can we think like this? How many more weapons should Russia use against children, women, civilians, Ukrainian soldiers in order for you to introduce additional sanctions? So once again, we call on our Western partners, international partners, to make the war spending unbearable for Russia. Any delay, any single day, month of delay will lead to new shelling, new attacks, new deaths, and new destruction. Secondly, we extremely need new and modern and effective weapons. We are doing more or less fine on the ground. You can see that Russia is withdrawing. In fact, because, for instance, when their military people say we will withdraw from outskirts of Kiev and Chernihiv, before that, there were successful counter-offensive operations of our Ukrainian armed forces, who threw them away from some cities around Kiev. So now, having failures on the ground, they have to explain somehow to their public that, yes, this is complete achievement of our targets and goals. We successfully completed phase 1 of the operation, so-called special operation, and we are now withdrawing our troops back. But we all know with you what Russian narratives mean. They are not withdrawing, they are regrouping, they are taking the new targets. They are taking the target of Mariupol, for instance. They want to ruin it, to wipe it out from the land, completely from the ground. In order to unblock such cities as Mariupol, we need weapon. We need additional weapon. We need weapon to protect such cities as Kharkiv. We need weapon to protect Kyiv. We ask for fighter jets. We ask for tanks. We ask for anti-ship weapon. This is what our partners have. It's not that we ask you to produce something additional. In many countries which are present today at the conference, you have these pieces. We know and you know that you have. We know and you know that you do not use them currently. We do not ask for more. We do not ask for some absolutely brand new equipment and techniques. But we ask for something which will help us to survive. And those steps, like the sanctions, should be made immediately, instantly, because we need to stop Russia now. Again, sorry for saying this, but if we will not stop the aggressor on the Ukrainian soil, and we are ready to do this, the aggressor might come to your countries. Next, my message is about Europeans' membership for Ukraine, EU membership. This goal is not only supported by Ukrainians now, because now more than 92% of Ukrainians support immediate joining of Ukraine to the EU. The EU citizens are in favor of this step. We know the results of the recent opinion polls in the European Union members, and if we take France, for instance, 62%, fortunately the minister does not hear this, but 62% of French population support entering of Ukraine into the European Union. In Germany, 69. In Italy, 71. Well, in Poland, it's 91. And absolutely understandable why the Poland leadership is absolutely, all the time asking their colleagues in the European members, please be quicker, please be more swift, please do more. just submitting the application in the middle of war was a step which I don't think many countries would dare, but that's what President of Ukraine did. And we expect this application to be considered without any delays. We are grateful for the EU's leader's decision to ask for the opinion of the European Commission. Now we are on the stage of preparing the opinion by the Commission, but unfortunately for the time being, Ukraine even received the questionnaire. We are ready to pass all the necessary stages and steps. We do not start from scratch. We have the successful fulfillment of association agreement. The joint assessment made by Ukraine and EU in October last year was positive. So Ukraine is not a brand new country without the rule of law or democracy. We have economic reforms. We have political reforms. We have a special security criteria because, yes, this is Ukraine who now defends the European Union. So these criteria, when comparing adherence of Ukraine to the Copenhagen criteria, should also be taken into the consideration. So we expect that the EU leaders would be able to take positive decision on granting to Ukraine a candidate status in May. Why not? And starting immediately accession negotiations as soon as possible and as soon as Commission presents its opinion within a couple of months. That's what we were promised by President of the European Commission, and that's what we expect. And my fourth message is also of utmost importance for us, is that Ukraine is standing for creating a system of clear and reliable security guarantees for not only Ukraine, but for all Europe. After we win, we all should make everything possible for this aggression not to happen anymore against any European state. And if it happens, all the European states are being prepared well in advance and well enough to withstand this aggression. You are talking today about UN. Sorry, but UN mechanism did not work properly. Neither the Security Council nor other UN institutions have helped to prevent this act of aggression. Today against Ukraine, previously against Ukraine in 2014, against Georgia in 2008, and sorry for this, will never prevent. UN is incapable of preventing any aggression. Just like it was the infamous Budapest Memorandum, which we signed in 1994, being deprived of the third largest nuclear potential. And we're counting this memorandum. But even the word guarantees was not in the text. It was insurance instead of guarantees. And the only mechanism which was envisaged by this memorandum was consultations. But even those consultations were not held neither in 2014, when Russia started its aggression against Ukraine, nor in 2022, when Russia started an open war against Ukraine. Again, coming back to the UN, what would you expect from UN if a permanent member of the UN Security Council started an aggression, and that even a resolution cannot be voted in the UNSC, never ever can be voted, even a mere resolution. Therefore, we need a strong need to replace this outdated post-World War II mechanism of security guarantees in Europe, in world, with a new model. Let's have it a new security system of Europe model. Minister was talking today about this. Okay, we welcome the efforts of France, we welcome the efforts of other European Union members, but how can you possibly talk about new European security system in Europe without Ukrainian president? Ukraine is now in the cornerstone of the European security. And that's why when we're now talking with Russians about possible treaty on the hard security guarantees for Ukraine, we're not talking only about Ukraine. We're talking about all of you. That's why we need your countries to be a security guarantors for Ukraine and for the whole European continent. That's why when we're talking about security guarantees, we mention not only US, not only UK, but we mention France, we mention Germany, We mention all our neighbors, mention such countries as Turkey, for instance. So this task is for all of us. This aggression should never ever happen. After we win, we have to have this clear security mechanism. I don't know where it will lead. I mean the negotiations with Russia, because currently the ball is on their side. They have taken Ukrainian proposals. We are waiting for their reaction. We are waiting for the high-level meeting between my president and president of Russia. My president is ready. President Putin is still not. But we do not have the time to drag on the war, because every minute, every hour, a civilian or a soldier is wounded or even being killed. Based on this, I would like to present my final message, and you heard it from my president, who has already put forward a very clear proposal to create a U-24 coalition of the united for peace. This could be a union of responsible states that have the strength and conscience to stop conflicts, to provide all necessary assistance in 24 hours, if necessary, weapons, if necessary, sanctions, or any kind of support, humanitarian, political, financial, everything you need to keep the peace fast, swift, to save lives immediately. In addition, such coalition could provide assistance to those who are experiencing natural disasters, man-made disaster, or epidemic. Just think about this idea and possible substance of such coalition. We are open to any valuable proposals and thoughts in order to implement such ambitious idea. Dear colleagues, we are continuing to defend our streets, our cities, our villages, our towns, our country, and our identity. Identity of true Europeans, of free people of goodwill. The misuse of its status by Russia at the global arena, in particular within UNSC and the UN and in other international institutions, have already put the Europe and the entire world practically to the threshold of the Third World War. For this crime, Russia must be brought to justice and to punishment. That is why very important to attract the international prosecution institutions to already witness the atrocities and genocide Russia is doing. Being with us today and helping Ukraine is the only way to achieve peace for all of us and to ensure that these awful pages of history will not repeat. Our common future will not and should not echo the darkest time in Europe, which we still remember. So I wish we have fruitful exchange and discussion during this conference. And most important, I wish your thoughts and ideas to be implemented, to be as much as practical as possible, because we need to implement all of your ideas and thoughts in practice in order to help my country, in order to help Ukrainian people, in order to help Europe. Let us stay united, united for victory, united for peace, united for Ukraine. Thank you for your attention. Slava Ukraini!
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Zhovkva. I understand that you have time for 1-2 additional questions. Please, audience, I see Mr. Sheriff, please.
James Shah, Estonian Foreign Policy Institute. Thank you for your very clear and robust remarks. As you mentioned, Ukraine sought security guarantees but ended up with assurances from several countries, including Russia, at the Budapest Memorandum, and we know what the result of that was. My question to you is, why in your current bilateral negotiations with Russia, are you proposing to include Russia as one of the countries that in future will be expected to guarantee Ukraine's security? Thank you.
Thank you, James. It's good to see you. Can I answer, or just we have some more
Yes, please
questions?
go ahead.
Thank you once again for mentioning this infamous Budapest Memorandum. Probably those who were in power by that time has made a huge mistake, and I think even some of them admit this, that we were, too sincere, too, maybe unknowledgeable or unexperienced for having this assurance instead of guarantees. And that's why now when negotiating, we should not repeat those mistakes. Question about Russia. Like Minister Le Drian told, Russia will not place itself somewhere else. The same as Ukraine, bordering Russia, will not place itself somewhere else. Maybe we would be dreaming to place Ukraine somewhere in place of Switzerland, I don't know, somewhere in other continents. But we are there, and we will be neighboring Russia forever. We will definitely not come to the state of events which used to be even before 2014 or definitely before 2022. And yes, Russia should not only bear responsibility for what it did already, but Russia should bear responsibility in future. And yes, Russian signature should be at this security guarantees treaty. But not only Russian signature, not only signature of Russian president, ratified by Russian parliament. We do not believe currently, we have big experience, even before this war, Russian guarantees only. That's why we need international leaders, international powers to be present at the same table, to be signing the same document, which should bear an equal status for all the countries' signatures, which should lay down clear procedures, order of command, if you will, what will happen, when it will happen, and how it will happen. And mere fact that Russia will know what will happen should prevent them from doing what they have done. Again, coming back to the subject, if Russia would have known what sanctions would have awaited her, maybe they would think about an open aggression. If Russia would have known how the Ukrainian skies could have been closed, they would probably think whether to invade. If Russia would have known what weaponry would Ukraine possess, they would probably think. Russia miscalculated in several items. They miscalculated the strength of Ukrainian armed forces. They miscalculated the strength of their armed forces, and they were not expecting to such high level of support, partially practical support. So now they have to know what awaits from them in future.
Thank you, Ihor. And I have only one more question left, and Svetlana Tsikhanouskaya would like to ask you one. Please, Svetlana.
Good afternoon, Mr. Zhovka. My name is Svetlana Tsikhanouskaya. I'm a democratic leader of Belarus. You know that free Belarusian people are standing with Ukrainians, our brothers and sisters. My question is, when you negotiate with Russia, do you insist on full withdrawal of troops from Belarusian territory as well? And if it's possible at all? Thank you.
Thank you, Svetlana. Really, the position of your country important, and thank you for the efforts you are personally doing. We have to understand that, unfortunately, Russian current leadership, or I would not call it leadership, current representatives of the Belarus power are going hand in hand. Definitely, it is very important to withdraw Russian troops from the territory of Ukraine, and this is where we currently concentrate. But you are putting very right question, because we do see where the aggression also comes from. Luckily, some people of your country still do understand the danger of direct entering of Belarus troops to Ukraine and understand the consequences of what will happen if they enter. That's what Russia lacked before 24th of February 2022. So now your country, your armed forces, see it, feel it, and hopefully will make the right conclusions.
So thank you very much, Mr. Zhovko, Deputy Head of Presidential Office of Ukraine. Thank you very much for your frank and sincere comments and views you shared with us, and please keep safe. Long live Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And now I ask our panelists to come up to podium, please. Svetlana, Richard, Karin. Svetlana. So Richard, maybe. Dear ladies and gentlemen, now swiftly we move on to the final stage of this session, which is panel discussion about the war in Ukraine. But as we have heard already and know very well, that this is not only war in Ukraine, it touches all of us, including our panelists, first and foremost, of course, Svetlana Tsikhanovskaya, who is the leader of Belarusian democratic movement. Also, we have here with us online, as far as I understand, permanent representative of Albania, United Nations, Fadil Hoxha. Good to see you. Very good morning to you back there in New York. We have Richard Gowan, very well-known expert on UN matters, currently the UN Director of International Crisis Group think tank. And last but not least, Karin Lundgren, who is very well experienced expert, also not only on Security Council matters, but on UN, on United Nations. Your experience, as far as I understand, goes back 35 years. So good to have you with us. While we have very limited time, and I know that Svetlana should leave us prior to the end of our session, I would like to start asking you, Svetlana Tsikhanovskaya, to share your views. Actually, you posed a question to Mr. Zhovko as well, linking up the fates of two countries, the Belarus as well, that I think that what we have at the moment, the war in Ukraine and Russian aggression against Ukraine, we could say aggression against Belarus as well, because your country is occupied by Russian forces, military forces for many months already. So how do you see opportunity in this, what is happening, or how people in Belarus would like to see the end of this war? Please.
Thank you so much, distinguished guest. Nice to meet all of you. I really understand, and people in Belarus understand, that the fate of Ukraine and fate of Belarus are deeply interconnected at this very moment. And we are sure that the outcome of this war, and we believe that Ukraine for sure will prevail, will open one more window of opportunity for Belarusians to get rid of the regime. As you know, since August 2020, Belarusians are fighting against regime, though all the NGOs, all the media in Belarus has been ruined. Hundreds of thousands of people had to relocate our country because of repressions, thousands of political prisoners. This is our reality at the moment. Lukashenko, of course, is rather weak because he has lost trust of Belarusian people. He is not legitimate in the eyes of democratic society. And of course, now he and some of his people became accomplices in this war against Ukrainians. But we have to, in this war, we have to divide regime and Belarusian people. Belarusian people are against this war. We don't want our soldiers to participate in the war against our brothers and sisters. Hundreds of Belarusian men joined Ukrainian army to defend Ukrainian lands at the moment. Our people who once had to flee Belarus because of repressions now helping to Ukrainian refugees. All our media, all our organizations and initiatives that have been working for free democratic Belarus now are working for Ukraine, because we are sure that now it's our turn to help Ukrainians, because after their victory, Ukrainians and the rest of the world, of course, will help us. And I have to say that at the beginning of the war, when Lukashenko was very brave just to say, me and Putin will capture Ukraine for a couple of days, and when it became evident that Ukraine are courageously defending their land, Lukashenko changed rhetoric. He says that, look, we are against this war, we don't want to participate, but regime is already participating. From our soil, missiles are being launched on territory of Ukraine. A maternity hospital was bombed from our territory, and Lukashenko has to share the responsibility for this. And at the moment, when Ukraine wins, Lukashenko's position will be very, very extremely weak, and we Belarusians have to use this moment to get rid of him. Of course, with the assistance of somehow Ukrainians, with the assistance of democratic world, and we will do this.
I have one quick question to you before we go to our panelists. Chatham House tells us that there is a very low support among Belarusians within Belarus today of this war, roughly 3% perhaps supporting the war in Ukraine. How do you explain this? Because the possibility to get open sources and media and alternative views on what's happening in Ukraine or around Ukraine is very limited in current Belarus. At the same time, we know that the support to Putin is skyrocketing, 83%.
Yeah, that's true, and this is the difference between Russia and Belarus. People in Belarus absolutely have a wonderful relationship with Ukrainians. We don't understand why we have to, not we, but Belarusian soldiers have to fight with our brothers and sisters. We have a lot of relatives in Ukraine, and we have never had any worsening relationship with the Ukrainian government or whatever. And of course, our army understand that they may be made to fight not to defend our country, not to, they are going to go to death for third country, for Russia, and they don't understand why they have to do this. According to Chatham House, about only 3% of Belarusians are supporting this war. It's a very narrow group of people, and even people in nomenclatura who seems to support Belarusian regime because of fear, of course, even they understand the consequences for our country if our soldiers will cross the border. So it's real numbers, and Lukashenko knows it as well. And he understands that even if he will press enough to make this criminal order to invade Ukraine, this order maybe will not be fulfilled by our soldiers, and he will look like loser even in the eyes of his accomplice Kremlin.
So I would like to now go to New York. Mr. Hoxha, I would like to hear from you and from your comments, what's happening in Security Council nowadays? Is Council only a sort of observer of international affairs and war in Ukraine, or there is some sort of possibility that the members, or elected members like Albania right now in Security Council can make a change on the ground?
Thank you very much for including Albania into this conference, and I'm very pleased to be in this panel with very distinguished and experienced colleagues. Yes, of course, we have one of the most tragic paradoxes. We have a permanent member of Security Council, a member that is there to guarantee peace and security, a member to whom the world, the General Assembly, has given an important key, which it is misusing, as we have seen, as it was said, and as everybody knows. This is a given state. It is true that the Security Council is paralyzed, and we know why. It's because of the Charter. We have Article 27 that provides the right of veto to some of the members, the 5 permanents, and Russia has been misusing it. This is not a surprise. This is not new. It is utterly regrettable, but this is where we are. But then to try to answer your question, the Council has not been idle. Since the 31st of January, the Council has met every week, sometimes twice a week. And this is important. The Council has not been able to take a decision, but the Council has been able to expose Russia, has been able to tell the truth, to condemn it and to counter Russia's narrative. And when it comes not only from the member states, but also from the very highest officials that are invited frequently to brief the Council, including the Secretary General, I think this is important because these are independent voices. These are not just positions of the member states in the Council. So the Council has been able to show loud and clear who the aggressor is, what they are doing, and why the Council cannot do more, and why the international law has been violated. And the Council has also made it very clear that if Russia would win, we know that Ukraine will not be the same, and probably we might not even have Ukraine. But if Ukraine will win, we hope to have a different Russia. And we have all been warned that a Russian win in this war will not only be stopped to Ukraine, and the world might not have just one Putin, but probably many more. And another one is that, yes, a resolution was presented initially from the campaign holders, Albania and the United States, and it was vetoed by Russia. But Russia was alone. Russia was alone in the cold. And of course, they managed to veto the resolution, but they didn't veto the world. And the world in the General Assembly, as everybody knows, on the 2nd of March, voted in an absolute majority, 141 countries that got together to condemn Russia, to ask Russia to stop that madness and the war. And of course, when you are a permanent member of the Security Council and you are left in such a distinguished company, I'm sorry to say, but Belarus, probably not the people, certainly not the people, 3%, but the leadership, and with Eritrea and Syria and North Korea, that's not really very glorious for a country like Russia. So 2/3 of the UN membership said very clearly and rightly that might is not right. Although that might that is wrong could not be defeated, I think that the 2 resolutions of the General Assembly have emboldened Ukrainian resistance, have made it easier for the European countries and other like-minded countries, that big coalition that is imposing unprecedented sanctions, inflicting devastating consequences and a high price for Russia. So I think this is also the contribution of the UN, who got together to really make it very easy. We have seen a behavior of the European Union, of NATO, of individual countries that we would not have anticipated two months ago. Just very quickly, 2 other points that Russia managed to paralyze the Council so far. But that hasn't made the UN irrelevant. As I said, I mean, there is this. The whole world is gathering there to condemn Russia, but also to promote, to protect the Charter, to protect international law for all of us. But also, the UN is on the ground. The UN is doing what it can, and we know at every crisis, and probably it is not always visible, in terms of humanitarian actions, the UN is the first to be on the ground. And what the UN can also do is really to provide information on human rights, on crimes, on abuses, on everything that is horribly happening, because we will need those facts for accountability, for those mechanisms. And that's the UN can do it much better than anyone else. And just my final word on this, I think that if we maintain to have this unity, the price for Russia and the hope for those who are fighting will be what we can do at the UN. And thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Hodja, and thank you for this very optimistic view on the current role of Security Council and actually keeping up our faith to this very important body of international organization in the United Nations. But I will turn now to Mr. Gowan. Your recent article in Foreign Affairs tells us a different story, that the entire organization right now is facing probably most difficult times, and maybe it is breaking point for the organization. How do you, knowing what's happening this moment in Ukraine, and how do we as the international community respond to this, how do you picture the future of both Security Council and the United Nations?
Well, thank you. I would respond to that by distinguishing between the Security Council and the rest of the UN system, because, as Ferret said, no, there is much more to the UN than just the Security Council. I would say that I fear that the toxins released in the Security Council by the war in Ukraine will affect Council discussions of some other significant issues. I think there is, for example, a fairly good chance that Russia will veto the mandates for the European Union's naval force, Irini, in the Mediterranean off the coast of Libya, and it could also veto the mandate for EUFOR Althea, the EU peace operation in Bosnia, simply as part of a broader strategic struggle with the EU and NATO sparked by what is happening in Ukraine. I think there are other areas where actually it will be possible for Council members to continue to cooperate, despite their differences over Ukraine, but I think that Karen, who is the real expert on the Security Council, will talk about some of those potential areas for cooperation. But actually what I wanted to hit upon was, again, a surprisingly optimistic note, because of course the Council was going to fail over this war. It failed in 2014. Those of us who have watched the body for some time predicted pretty accurately what would happen in the Council in February and March. I did. You can find an article I wrote in January describing how the Council would fail, and it was spot on. We also knew that the Secretary General would be very limited in this conflict. Antonio Guterres cannot really act as a mediator in a conflict involving a member of the P5 in this way. He has spoken out very firmly against the illegality of this war, but because he has spoken out against the illegality of the war, the Russians don't like him, and the Russians are not going to treat him as a mediator in this conflict, and they don't really want to talk to any of his senior political staff either. But if we put the Security Council aside, and in saying that, Ferret, I would also add that your efforts have been, sterling in the Council, and we admire how much you've been pushing on it. If we put the Secretary General aside, the odd thing is the rest of the UN is sort of doing its job. The Human Rights Council has mandated a commission of inquiry to track war crimes in Ukraine. The ICC is investigating what's going on in Ukraine. The ICJ, the International Court of Justice, has already called on Russia to stop this war. And the ICJ very rarely moves quickly. In this case, it has spoken out quickly. The humanitarian track, we see progress. although we also know that the WHO has not been able to get supplies into Mariupol, but nonetheless, the UN has got supplies into Kharkiv. We see Martin Griffiths, the head of the humanitarian pillar, possibly now going to Kiev and Moscow. I think that the humanitarian work will actually continue and expand. And lastly, there is this astonishing level of political support in the General Assembly for Ukraine. In 2014, when Ukraine tabled a resolution affirming its sovereignty over Crimea, 100 countries voted in favor. It was generally seen as a defeat for Ukraine. This year, 141 countries have condemned Russia's aggression. 140 countries repeated that condemnation in another resolution last week. That is a far stronger response than we've seen in the General Assembly to other serious recent crises like the situation in Myanmar, or very sadly the situation in Belarus, on which the UN has too often been silent. So I think overall the UN is responding as best it can when it has a hole in its heart. And the hole in its heart is obviously the Russian veto in the Security Council. Let me just say, though, that we shouldn't take this level of support for granted. Talking to African diplomats, talking to diplomats from the non-aligned movement, we're hearing concerns. And the concerns we're hearing is that they say, yes, we sympathize with Ukraine. We're shocked by what Russia has done. But we are very concerned about the economic shocks of this war. We are very concerned about the global food price shock that is coming because of the blockage of food supplies, especially from Ukraine. And we are very concerned about the fact that all European countries are going to massively reduce their overseas development aid to the rest of the world because it is all going into Ukraine. Every European country will spend 0.7% of its its economic product on aid this year, and it will all go to Ukraine, and none of it will go to the Congo or to East Timor or anywhere else. And so in the General Assembly now, there are a lot of countries that have supported Ukraine so far who are getting worried. And I think it's really important that we repeat the message that we heard from Minister Le Drian, which is actually this comes back to one man and this comes back to Putin. Putin has assaulted Ukraine, and I would say Belarus, directly. Putin has assaulted the European security order, but he's also assaulted the global economy and global food supplies. And I think we actually need to build a real coalition with countries from the Global South in the General Assembly. Lebanon has now suggested this, to ensure that global food supplies are stabilized so that the shocks coming out of Ukraine do not undermine weak states in the rest of the world when food prices rise and then there are riots on the streets and then there is state collapse, which is a real risk if you have a massive food shock.
Thank you, Richard. Paying attention to these very important parts or sectors of the United Nations, doing its work daily, and that tells us how important it actually is, not only for our countries, but many countries in the world, that this multilateral center of as the United Nations is, preserves in this major assault of Russia, not only against global economy, but against global order in many ways. But Karin, if I have a moment to just ask one more question from Svetlana, because I understand that Svetlana has to go to for further meetings. We heard from Mr. Zhokva what Ukraine needs right now, what kind of help they need. What kind of help Belarusian people need today from the international community? First and foremost, of course, not to forget that your fight for freedom is there as well. But what is your message today?
So, of course, thank you, first of all, not to lose focus from Belarus. We think that Belarusian political prisoners, that lawlessness in our country shouldn't be like overshadowed by the war in Ukraine. But we, of course, we understand that the war should be priority. But I have to say that we want democratic changes in our country. And we are sure that these democratic changes could happen only without dictator in our country. And we are still lobbying for new elections in Belarus. But at the moment, we have to avoid impunity of the regime. We have to understand that Lukashenko shares the full responsibility with Kremlin for this war, and we have to create multiple points of pressure on the regime through sanctions, through isolation, through delegitimization. On the other hand, we need to support Belarusians themselves, Belarusian civil society who are with Ukrainians at the moment. So impose the harshest sanctions ever on Lukashenko's regime for him not to become a huge loophole for Russian sanctions. It's very important, and it's very important not to be fooled by Lukashenko again, because now he wants to sit on two chairs simultaneously, being accomplice to Kremlin. He shows that, look, I'm not in this war, and he wants to have also this window of opportunity for be useful for Western countries when maybe possible time will come. So he cannot stay in our country, because while Lukashenko is in power, there will be constant threat to security of the whole Europe. So help us, for us to help Ukrainians, for both of our countries to help the whole Europe.
Thank you very much indeed, Svetlana Tsikhanovskaya. Thank you that we had the opportunity to listen your views today here in Tallinn. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
So I turn now to Karin. As the Executive Director of Security Council Report think tank and having a long-serving career as within United Nations, you are probably one of the most sort of experienced, the best experts to tell us, is Security Council in the deathbed, or perhaps if to put the other way around this question, can we imagine at all that we could escape from being hostage of dictator Stalin, what was created at the end of World War II, the situation what we are entered in right now, where we are not able to use this mechanism actually to preserve peace if Russia is in action?
Thank you, Marco. There's no doubt that the invasion of Ukraine has been a huge challenge to the authority, to the reputation of the Security Council, and to the principles of the UN Charter. Since February 24th, many observers have discovered that the Security Council is not able to prevent a permanent member of the Council going to war. But this should not have come as a surprise, as I think we've heard from some speakers. The way the Security Council has functioned is actually pretty much how it was designed to function, with the exception, I would say, of the expectation that the permanent members should themselves uphold international law. But the veto that so many have complained about, or have complained about the abuse of, is a built-in part of the design of the Council, and it was the price for having the permanent members become part of this new order in 1945. And I think people can forget just how radical it was when this was set up for sovereign countries to actually give up a bit of their sovereignty, to agree to be bound by decisions of the Security Council, including decisions on the use of force. Because it's an old institution, we forget that it was radical. If it was set up today, it would be radical. And personally, I doubt that something similar could be set up today. So it's worth remembering that, that context. And what goes with that is also that historically, it has rarely, if ever, been possible for the Security Council to stop a permanent member determined to go to war. In fact, in the 1960s, former Secretary General U Thant, who was active behind the scenes in trying to prevent the conflict in Vietnam worsening, also believed that it was not appropriate or not wise for the UN to become directly involved in conflicts involving one of the permanent members, because it would expose the UN as ineffective. So having said that this is all part of the reality and it's challenging and painful, what needs to happen now? So I have 3 recommendations about how to build on this international response to the invasion of Ukraine. One is that we need to think differently about the Security Council, bearing in mind these built-in limits. Not how disappointing and useless it is, as we sometimes hear, but that it is one actor among several. Several speakers have talked about other parts of the UN, the ICJ, the ICC, the humanitarian support, the Human Rights Council. All true, and I think Ferit also mentioned, it is so important what is said in the Security Council. This is a norm-creating body, and members need to reinforce those norms, even if the Council isn't able to ultimately deliver the resolution that is needed. But it's just as important that actors outside the UN, outside the Security Council, take a stand and act against aggression, against crimes against humanity, against genocide wherever they occur. And that means working through regional and sub-regional bodies, military alliances, with civil society, with the private sector actors. These are not alternatives to the Council, but they are really important supplements acting together. So a new view of where the Council belongs in this set of mechanisms, I think, is one of our takeaways. My second recommendation, perhaps a bit counterintuitive, is to take care when we call for Security Council reform. The reform of the Security Council is a Pandora's box. For everyone who is now calling for a stronger institution, there are other members who would like to see reform going in the other direction, who want to see a Security Council that is less effective, has a smaller agenda, carries less authority, and we are not just talking about one member state that wants to subvert the Council. This is a group that thinks the Council currently has too much authority and power. I think the General Assembly, which some have proposed as an alternative, because look at the 141 votes, I think that's also an area to be a bit cautious. It's true that they delivered all these votes, but it's also true that member states in the GA are going to get tired very fast of being lobbied by everyone for their votes. It took a lot of lobbying to reach 140 and 141. There are many members who don't want to be subjected to that lobbying, who want to abstain. I was at another conference earlier this week. I heard references to, quote, principled neutrality as what some members want to practice, and also fond references to the non-aligned movement. So be careful about opening the box of calling for reform. But third point, the Charter needs to be defended. Grave violations of the Charter need to carry a high cost, a higher cost than they sometimes have. Otherwise, there's no deterrence for these acts. Ukraine is a remarkable test case of different actors, different groups coming together to impose sanctions. And we will see when the cost of those sanctions becomes evident in all our societies, whether the enthusiasm can be maintained for standing in solidarity with Ukraine, because there will be a cost to many of us, and even worse in some countries that are already extremely fragile. with this, it's not just about sanctions. There is a need to call out all serious violations of the Charter. There has been a double standard. There has been selectivity in the way some standards are called out and not others. Really, that has to stop. I do see a role for the Secretary General to do more in this regard. Finally, there is a strong need to call out institutions that enable or condone or finance the type of aggression that is taking place. Managing sanctions and also seeking greater transparency around global financial flows and hidden assets. It's an extremely sensitive subject, but this is the moment to press on that. And these are also areas where I think small countries can be extremely effective. So for the past few years, the Security Council has not been a place for decisive preventive or normative measures, I think we can say, but Ukraine has the possibility of being a turning point in global governance and possibly one that helps us maintain some faith in having a rules-based international order.
Thank you very much indeed. I very much liked how you ended your sort of set of proposals. And I think that as we have to see this as an opportunity for all of us, also it is opportunity for United Nations and United Nations Security Council, end of the day, what's happening in Ukraine. And hopefully with the win of Ukraine, we can manage somehow to talk more substantially about the possible reform of Security Council. But now I see that we have roughly 10 minutes left to the end of this session here, and I'll turn to audience, very knowledgeable audience. You are with us today, so please, if you have a question or a remark to make, please show. Everything is so clear.
There's one on the left.
Yes, please, let's get a couple of questions. And please, yes, one is here. Please introduce and...
Thank you. Hi, good morning. I'm Åsa Regnér from UN Women, and I will speak later today. Being an expert of gender equality and women's rights, to my mind, small states, which is the rubric of this conference today, have done quite a lot to push for women's rights, for women's NGOs, briefers in the Security Council, and thus also change the normative outcome, as Karin pointed to. So I would just like to ask you, who are experts on the Security Council from another angle, do you share that view, and what do you think about women's contribution, women's organizations' contribution to the Security Council? I think it is also very relevant to the situation in Ukraine that we've discussed so much. Thank you.
Thank you. There was one more question, please.
Thank you so much. My name is Anna Salovala. I'm the UN Director from the Finnish Ministry for Foreign Affairs, and just would like to take this opportunity to thank Estonia for organizing this excellent conference, and also congratulations for your council membership, where you certainly showed that a small state can make a difference. And thank you for the extremely interesting panel, and again, thank you for your interesting views for Richard and Karen. Always pleasure hearing your views, and I couldn't agree more on that UN has actually worked with Ukrainian crisis, even though the Council has obviously been paralyzed, and I can definitely agree that it's of course impossible with the structure that it was built on to act on crisis, and that of course unfortunate, but reality. But as said, UN has done a lot more, and I think we can be fairly satisfied with or more than fairly satisfied with the GA resolutions and the broad support for Ukraine, and then condemning the Russia's war, and we need to maintain that coalition. Okay, but I really wanted the Security Council reform. Obviously, I agree that then it's very difficult, politically probably impossible. But there has been a lot of support for the initiatives to restrict the use of veto. That is a beautiful principle. Finland has, of course, supported the French-Mexican initiative and Liechtenstein's initiative on that. But do you see any kind of a way to make that reality? Because I think that's almost as impossible as changing the whole council structure to do that. And another question relating to that is can the General Assembly, the United for Peace mechanism, can we somehow develop that or use that more efficiently? Thank you so much.
Thank you. So please, panelists, maybe Fetil, you would like to start from New York.
Thank you very much. Just two thoughts about these two important questions. First, on the presence of women in the work of the Security Council. We saw last year that women, peace and security, one of the important issues on the agenda of the Council, the resolution 1325 and the successive 10 resolutions have really made a change in the way that the Security Council has seen its relationship with women briefers, women activists, women from civil society, and thus this trend will continue this year. We will have 5 successive presidencies who will have women, peace and security as a top priority during their presidencies, including Albania in June. And we've seen a remarkable example during the month of January when Norway, and credit to them, they made sure that at every meeting when there was a briefer, there was either just a woman or at least one woman as well, and we will follow suit to that. Everybody recognizes that the presence of women, their contribution, their spirit of bridge building is absolutely necessary and brings a freshness in ideas and thoughts in the Council. Regarding the reform, I would agree with Karen to be very cautious about the reform, and we know that this is extremely complex and difficult. If it were really easy, it would have been made so far. It has started in '93 and it's going on, and it's really going into a roundabout. It's not really progressing. But still, we know that to change these fundamental rights and privileges that were accorded through the Charter, it needs time, it needs a critical mass. So the proposal from France and Mexico is absolutely a good one. France has, and again, credit to them, respected the non-use of veto since, I think, '95. So that's an example. Probably other permanent members should follow suit. We're not yet there, and we've seen what Russia has done with, at least with Syria. I think more than 15 vetoes, and they also vetoed a resolution last December on climate change, which is absolutely a shame, probably worth for Guinness record of stupidity. But again, I think it is through critical mass, it is through dialogue, it's through efforts that we might arrive one day to see how we can deal with the only problem that is really fundamental is the veto, which really marks the legitimacy of the Council and the UN at large when the Council is involved. Thank you.
Thank you, Fetil. And now, for last few minutes, our panelist, Karen Richards, will start. And maybe you could also find a way to connect with our topic of the session as well.
Oh, absolutely. I want to take Osa's question, though, about women, peace, and security, where the Security Council has done so much on this topic. And yet, when we look at who is at the table in negotiations over Ukraine, when we look at what's happening in Afghanistan, I'm afraid when push comes to shove and it's hard security questions, the WPS agenda really is pushed into second place, if not lower. What I would say is a real challenge right now in the Security Council is there's pushback against some topics where some members no longer want to even agree to previous language of resolutions. We see that pushback around human rights issues, around international humanitarian law, and quite importantly, around what I think many of us agree are the new emerging topics of international peace and security. So there's resistance. There has been resistance to discussing cyber. Previously, there was resistance to discussing pandemics. And obviously, there's resistance to discussing climate. So I would say that something we have to continue to work on is not allowing the Council to maintain this very narrow, traditional, military security-focused mindset about what are the real peace and security issues, because most of the world thinks that climate is one of them and belongs on that agenda. So a lot more work is needed to have Council members listen to what the rest of the membership thinks actually constitutes threats to international peace and security. My organization, Security Council Reform, doesn't take a position on, did I say Security Council Reform? Security Council report doesn't take a position on reform issues in the Security Council, so I'll happily leave that to my friend Richard.
Richard.
Thank you. So first, I defer to Karen on the point about women, peace and security. I would just point out that there's one member of the Council that hates talking about women, peace and security, and it's Russia. So ideologically, it's just a topic that Moscow does not like discussing. So let's have extra women briefers. Firstly, because they have inherent value, and secondly, because they will annoy the Russians. So that is my advice to Albania. On council reform, look, I worked as an advisor on Security Council reform once, and I want that bit of my life back, because it was a thorough waste of time. What I learned during that process, though, was that even if, by some miracle, all UN member states, including the P5, agreed to council reform, it would still take somewhere between 6 and 8 years to implement council reform, because I think 2/3 of the membership have to ratify it through their parliamentary processes. So even if you got an agreement on council reform tomorrow, it will take almost a decade to turn into reality. If your answer to any policy problem is Security Council reform, it's because you don't have a real answer to the policy problem. It's not an answer in real concrete terms, to be absolutely blunt, although the Council should be reformed. On veto reform, yes, the UK and France have not cast a veto, I think even since the early 90s. There's one country that is profoundly opposed to veto reform, and that's the US. The US will not accept any reform that means that it could not use its veto to protect Israel in the Security Council. So we've got to be blunt. It's not just Russia and China that are opposed to veto reform. It's also the US. But I think it's important to talk about veto reform because actually there is one country that cares about it, and that is China. And it's funny that we haven't talked at all about China in this session, but I think it's important to say that when it comes to the Ukraine issue, we have seen that China is notably nervous in the UN. And China has not wanted to cast a veto alongside Russia in the Security Council over Ukraine. Russia has mainly abstained on resolutions in other UN bodies relating to Ukraine. China is, in the UN system at least, very nervous about being associated with Russia's war. And I think that it's actually really important to keep giving that message to China, that if it associates itself too closely with Russia at the UN, it is going to damage itself reputationally and it's going to damage itself diplomatically. And so, I mean, talking about limiting the veto is one way to bring that message home to China. There are more direct ways to bring that message home to China. But I think I'd like to end there because, at the end of the day, what Russia has done means that it is geopolitically reliant on China in a way that it was not on the 23rd of February. And so actually China has an important part to play, I think, in containing Russia at the UN, even though we don't obviously have a completely shared strategic view with Beijing.
Thank you, Richard. I think this is exactly the good moment to end up our session on this last statement, and I would like to that you could join me thanking our panelists. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Fetal. Thank you, Richard and Karen. And now we start a lunch break for 1 hour, and please come back here at 2 p.m. Thank you.
one more practical announcement. You are all invited to join the lunch downstairs on the ground floor. Thanks.